Hello, welcome to the Week in Review, where we break down some of the major stories of the preceding week, shaping this country and beyond. Tonight, we begin with a coroner's finding over the Omar Badjie case, the 27-year-old who died in a police incident in Mandinari last year. Then we turn to concerns over voter registration, the integrity of voter registration, with thousands of double entries, raising concerns. Next, more than 700 port workers threatened to go on strike over pay and conditions following their transfer to Allport Banjul. We also look at an international passport fraud case in Canada, where Gambian labeled documents have prompted a response from the immigration authorities. And we examine a major regional security forum in Banjul, where West African leaders are grappling with rising instability in the Sahel. These stories and more to come. I am Mamadou Mbouch, and joining me in the studio here is my colleague Usman Jata to help me unpack some of these stories. Welcome to the program, Usman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mbouch. Thanks for having me once more.
You're welcome. Now we begin with that coroner's report. It was a landmark coroner's finding following the death of 27-year-old Omar Badjie. Let's just listen to this clip.
A press release issued today, April the 20th, 2026, the coroner found that Omar Badjie died from an acute brain injury caused by physical exertion, stress and assault by police officers during a law enforcement operation. The court had testimony from 12 witnesses, reviewed a post-mortem report and visited the scene before delivering its verdict, which pointed to the involvement of police officers in the circumstances leading to his death.
There we've got it, Mr. Jata. In the immediate aftermath, the police said that the victim collapsed while fleeing, wasn't that what was said? But witnesses and family told a different story. With this finding, they appear to have been vindicated.
Indeed. I think the finding is very important. It was a key step that the Chief Justice decided to inquire into the death of a 27-year-old young man. It's a very tragic death, actually, and because it shows how justice works, to some extent, because it's not only about listening to one person to say that this is what actually happened. So it's very important that it was done. And like you said, when the initial reports from the police were the young man was fleeing a police patrol, and that was when he just died to some extent. But the report is telling us something different, and it means a lot to the operations of the police. As we know, this year has not been an easy year for the police to some extent. One could say that we have witnessed the high-profile police case that is the police shooting incident which occurred at the High Court. So it's a huge development, and I think for the fact that the Office of the Chief Justice has also endorsed it to some extent, it shows the government's commitment to making sure that justice prevails. And to some extent, even some people online are recommending that the Inspector General of Police should resign because of the findings.
But this is the thing. The initial statement by the police, what they said, and now what the coroner's findings is sort of revealed. So what does it do to public trust? This is very crucial, isn't it?
Indeed.
So this sort of thing undermines
it
public
raises
trust.
the question about the work of the police instead of doing its job, that is to public and its property, rather than being an agent to create some sort of the otherwise in public. So I think it's important that the police know its mandate, that they do their job in line with it. And despite the fact that another lesson one could grab from it is that despite the fact that one may be involved in a criminal activity or an alleged criminal activity, the way the person should be handled matters a lot, because I believe police officers are trained officers. They should be professional officers in that case, to handle anyone professionally, to make sure that a case of this like, is not repeated, it sends a lot about the credibility of the police.
That's it. It raises questions how effective this training, they've been having lots of training in how to police, as it were, in a democratic setting. So this raises questions about the effectiveness of this training they've been receiving.
The security sector reforms. So it's quite important. I think, it's a huge lesson for both the police and the entire country, basically.
So we would hope that perhaps this would be a turning point.
And we will also want to know, the outcome of, how things go, because already, the coroner's report has already, how do I call it, recommended, for the case to move to the AG and the Director of Public Prosecution. So who knows, it might be in court, to some extent.
So possible prosecution.
Yes, possible prosecution. And equally as well, when the report came, in fact, after the investigation, after the police launched an investigation, they also revealed that 4 of its officers were kind of suspended to some extent. So I think, it all raises some eyebrows towards the incident, and one could say interesting moments lie ahead, with regards to the matter.
That's it, but it might also suggest that further reform needs to be done.
Indeed.
Thank you very much there, Mr. Jata. Now to our next story. Electoral integrity concerns. Over 36,000 citizens have registered in the supplementary exercise, but more than 2,000 cases of double registration have been detected. Let's just listen to the chief of the IEC.
It is a matter of concern to the Commission that some voters who were already registered in 2021 are showing up to be registered again. This amounts to double registration, which is a serious offense under the electoral laws of the country. We identified over 2,000 cases of double registration, despite our massive voter education and sensitization.
There we have Mr. Joseph Colley, who is the head of the IEC. Well, the first question we ask really is just how secure is the system? They've detected it, but how did it happen in the first place, 2000?
Indeed, that is a question I've been also raising in my head. If the IEC has a proper system, once somebody's name is typed in it, the date of birth, it should be able to show some, a Google system, sort of to say, this person, or to show a similar name. At least you could raise the question, have you ever been registered in 2021 to some extent? So I think it's important. I don't know how credible is the system actually, but I think, there's a need to also come up with options wherein if you type a person's name, and you could detect that this person was registered to some extent, rather than just relying on voter education. Because from what the chairman just said, it's despite the massive voter education, it turns out that, we have got over 36,000 people, being registered again, so that's a bit, it could only be, to some extent, one could argue, it could be maybe insufficient, inadequate training of the IEC registration officials, because they were trained to some extent. It's just a claim actually, but it means the IEC has to do a lot to close the gap.
That's it. So the awareness campaign, that's one thing.
That's it.
But you're going to have also enforcement regime because some people, when they are bent on breaking the rules, they will, never mind what the campaign.
Indeed, and technology is improving, daily. So if you are using technology, more especially in this age of AI, you can always develop systems to recognize, double registration. And just recently, I renewed my voter's card, and actually it just took me five minutes or so. And I just said my name is so, and when they checked, they saw a lot of Osmans, but eventually I had to submit my date of birth for them to be able to track me.
As you're talking about date of birth,
yes.
Your birth certificate.
Yes.
I mean, there were reports of questionable birth certificates, weren't there? Some even carrying identical serial numbers. So that also raises question about our identity verification process.
Indeed. One may say the serial number is another problem. But the question is, authorities have already declared that they have stopped issuing these birth certificates since 2021. How on earth why are they still like circulating, and how could like IEC officials rely on it? So it's a double question, though it's happening once like people are coming with this, but why are they accepting them if they've already been stopped from printing in the system? So I think it's important, like as a country, we start taking some of these things very seriously, because if not, like it's always going to affect the voter credibility, and that should not happen to some extent. I think as a country we have gone far, and we should be leading in terms of some of these things actually.
So talking about credibility,
yes.
The Commission also raised concerns about political interference, the political actors interfering in this. So where is the line between political mobilization and interference?
Sometimes I think politicians are not giving the IEC the chance to do their job. Because if it is called the Independent Electoral Commission, they should be allowed to do their job without, any, interference. When you go to polling stations, registration centers, you see, a lot of these party agents, stationed there. And in fact, this was addressed in the latest press release of the National Council for Civic Education. They've mentioned that though it is a right to be observing, the process, but, you should not stop, the IEC officials from doing their work, which is very evident in most of the registration centers. So I think there should be a line, despite the fact that you are trying to, help, to some extent, I will just call it help actually, because it is the IEC's job to do the registration process. And if there is anything that is missing, they will be the one to guide you, to tell you need A, B, and C to be able to do that. It's like even if you lost your voter's card to some extent, you have to fill a form to say that my voter's card got damaged, or it was missing to some extent. So I think the politicians should be confident enough, allow the IEC to do their job, and December 5th, the people will decide.
Absolutely. So from these supplementary registrations, we see that it appears that participation is high, but this is a situation where confidence must also be high, or even higher.
Indeed.
So what do you think these reports of fraud sort of tarnishing the credibility? That's a huge issue, isn't it?
Indeed.
Issues of trust as well.
Indeed, indeed. And the issue of the supplementary, most people are getting it wrong. Most people think it's a general voter registration, but it's a supplementary.
Well, it's not, exactly.
They're just trying to update the system, and that's it. But like I will always say in the past, the 2026 election is a very crucial one, and every political party is taking it seriously. It's like the 2026 presidential election, and that is why every party is gearing up to some extent. But the chances of electoral fraud to some extent is very high, because just yesterday I saw on social media in one of the villages in CRR, minors were being registered. I can't ascertain whether they are minors, but from the picture, their appearance, one could say, one could also claim that maybe by the time it is 2020, December 5th, they might turn 18. All of that is possible. But I think my message is the IEC, as the main electoral body in the country, has to be vigilant and make sure that minors are not registered.
Okay, let me ask this. We see this simply as a sort of friction you get in a large-scale national exercise, or do you see it as symptomatic of something deeper in there?
I think it's not just a national exercise, actually. It goes beyond the exercise, and some people will always want to bypass the system to some extent.
That's it. What I'm trying to get at is that whether we should see this as a kind of isolated incident, it doesn't go to the very heart of the process itself.
Indeed.
So how do we see it? Does this go to the very heart of the process itself, that we need systemic reforms? Or this is just one of those things? In a huge, large-scale national exercise, you do get this normal friction, don't you?
We really need that, actually. I think, there has to be a systems developed to stop most of these frictions happening, during the political, the voter registration. Sometimes you feel like they are uncalled for, they are unnecessary. The publication, taking pictures of people's information and putting it on social media. and these are all things the NCC warned of. It's a violation against the right of people. And I think the IEC should, henceforth take serious steps towards it. Actually, they should not take it lightly. Because this is about elections, and election means a lot. To the country. So I think it's important. We should not take it lightly, of course.
All right. Thank you there, Mr. Jata. Now to our next story. More than 700 port workers transferred to Port Banjul took to the streets protesting over their working conditions. Let's just listen to the head of this group, Adam Jata.
What we are just demanding is a fair concern on our welfare. We were promised that we'll be moving to Alport under the same terms and conditions. Nothing will change. As I speak to you right now, there are staff who go home with $2,500 every month. And now the Tobaski is approaching. There are no internal loans. We cannot even take loans at the bank. So what do they want the staff to live on? Are we supposed to work like this and then stay wretched until we retire?
There we heard Adam Jata, the head of this group. It appears as if the terms of the transfer were not respected by Alport. What do you make of it?
This is not the first incident. I think this is the highest incident, actually. But they have raised serious complaints, against the way they are treated. And I think to some extent it shows some failure from the management, because the association's president claimed, initially they were promised that they would be working on the same terms and references as of that of the GPA, but now it turns out that it's not happening that way. What is causing that? I think that is something the GPA should really work on towards making sure that their staff are being, the welfare of their staff have been respected, because these people, they work under very hard conditions. They work at the port, so it's important that their welfare is being taken care of. But I like the fact that the GPA MD, received their petition, and he promised them that he would really take their matter with urgent concern.
That's it, and there was a press release, wasn't there, by the GPA stating that full responsibility of HR, human resource and administrative matters, have been transferred to them. What do you make of this split management? So from now on, the operational activities really will be conducted by Alport, but when it comes to HR and admin issues, GPA.
GPA. So I think that to some extent, it shows the GPA's commitment towards to making the port very efficient, giving it, entrusting it to Alport, to make sure that they give them the required space to work efficiently. I think that is very important to some extent. But to some extent as well, what it creates, I think they need a little bit of monitoring, or they need some it should be a synchronized system where they have to work together, to make sure that the staff are not affected to some extent. I also thought of that. I said, if this is really a transition, one could call it a transitional process actually, but there has to be some involvement of the GPA throughout to make sure that life goes on in terms of staff welfare, so that's it basically.
Yes, but how do you respond to the argument that, yes, of course, with this arrangement, it had ended strikes. They had threatened toward a 28-day strike.
Strike, yeah.
That's it. So workers' rights would be protected and all the rest of it. But there is a fear that this dual command might bring operational friction. So just imagine the workers report to GPA for pay and discipline, for instance. Yeah. But again, they take technical orders from Alport. Wouldn't this lead to confusion, slow decision making?
Indeed. It's gonna bring some friction to some extent. But like I said, there has to be an involvement. It has to be a synchronized system where both parties work together, because you cannot leave everything in the hands. So it's a concession actually, but it's important to have everyone on board. That way around, they would avoid some slow actions, from the other side to some extent actually. Yeah.
That's it. But this is an interesting piece of information. I read sort of in a report, now listen to this, in many cases where governments have intervened in HR matters, the long-term result has been a return to the inefficiencies that the concession was originally intended to fix, such as overstaffing and political influence in hiring.
Yeah.
So that's a report, not necessarily that that's what's going to happen here, but in other situations where they've had a similar arrangement, this is what analysts really have found. So these are the risks that we face.
Indeed, indeed. So that is why it needs like if you look at it currently, they're trying to renegotiate like some of the deal, because like some of the conditions have not been met, like they are behind like a time schedule, so they're trying to renegotiate like the contract. So, but it all means like the government has to like step up to some extent to make sure that this concession goes as planned. If not, it might not be in the best interest of the country, one could claim.
That's it, and they must ensure efficiency.
Indeed.
That is important. Now let's go to our fourth story. A case in Canada has put the Gambia's passport system under the spotlight. After a 44-year-old Nigerian was arrested with multiple fraudulent passports labeled as Gambian. Let's just take a look and listen.
In a statement published on its official Facebook page, the Gambia Immigration Department clarified that reference to fraudulent passports from the Gambia relate only to the apparent origin or labeling of the documents, not their authenticity. The department emphasized that it is the sole legally mandated authority responsible for issuing Gambian passports, all of which are produced through secure and verifiable systems. It further stated that the passports in question were not issued by the department and are therefore deemed counterfeit.
Yes, so they had to respond.
Indeed.
But one wonders whether they had done an internal investigation or it is taken for granted that no, our people can never do that. It is important for us to know exactly, isn't it? Maybe we will have to wait for investigations in Canada. How exactly did she acquire them?
Indeed, I think that is very important, like to have a full picture of like what happened. It's just like the case we were talking about, the case of Omar Badjie, you know, the police response and the coroner's findings.
The coroner's findings, exactly.
So I think it's important that like the authorities also like investigate the matter, you know, is very important, because as they would say, one rotten potato, you know, spoils, you know, the entire bag to some extent. So there is a need for that actually, and it's very alarming. You know, it raises a lot of questions, you know, credibility about our passports and so forth, you know, and that is why like the authorities should take it with seriousness actually. But also, it's important to also highlight the rise of AI, Gen AI, and how some of these documents could be manipulated. And, you know, according to the global document fraud, you know, it shows that almost like 28, you know, 0.5%, increased of like document fraud happens every year. So, you know, this thing is on the rise, and, you know, people can do anything to get these, you know, documents now, you know, with the help of AI. So that is why I think, you know, immigration officials or immigration personnel should be very vigilant, you know, towards like tracking such fraudulent documents.
That's it. So it makes you wonder how resilient our system is, giving this sort of increasingly sophisticated networks that can do these things.
Indeed, indeed. So we need a lot of capacity building in terms of that, like to be able to detect, you know, some of these things. Because if you look at it, the lady like was not only, you know, found with like 5 Gambian passports. She also like got another 2 South African passports. You know, how did she get all of that? And she is Nigerian to some extent. So it's important to look into that, you know, and that alone could also raise the question that maybe one could say it's not a Gambian, you know, activity. But in the comment sections, when we uploaded the story, actually many claim that, you know, it was within from the GID, and that's just a claim actually, and
Absolutely.
a claim is always arguable.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So that's it. Their authenticity. They were at pains to make that point.
Yeah.
Yep. You've got this passport labeled Gambian, so the authenticity is something else.
Sure.
But here, transnational crime. I'm Nigerian with Gambian passport, caught in Canada. So that in itself tells you that the international cooperation needed. One wonders how strong this international cooperation is to deal with issues like that.
Indeed, indeed. So it tells a lot about like a cooperation, you know, because, you know, it's not a one-man job, like it's a teamwork, and to detect such things, you know, it matters. And sometimes, even if it were like a fraud case, like somebody prepared it, let's say, for example, it would require a teamwork, like for you to be able to do that. It cannot be a one-man business in such a, I believe, because, you know, looking at the complexity, you know, involved in like getting like a passport to some extent. So I think it's important, and there is a need for more, a greater cooperation, you know, and as the GID statement mentioned, you know, they will continue to work with the Canada Border Agency towards making sure that, you know, they unravel the truth about this case, and I believe we would get to, you know, hear something about it, the case sometime, inshallah.
Thank you very much,
Yep.
there, Mr. Jata. Now to our next story. During the week in review, Banjul became the hub for a high-level diplomacy and security dialogue as regional and international actors gathered to confront the deepening crisis in the Sahel and West Africa. Let's just take a look and listen.
The African Union does not come to this workshop with the pretense that these problems are simple or that Miss Sahel alone can resolve them. What we bring is the conviction that coordinated, principled, and people-centered approaches pursued together can reverse these trends.
We should use those institutional setups to continue to serve the West African people. We have therefore agreed to ensure that our people continue to enjoy the gains of regional integration that have been built over 50 years.
Yes, Mr. Jata, there, we've had years of military operations, haven't we, across Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, but still, the insecurity remains widespread. Is the current approach working? And from what you've heard, there we heard from Mamadou Tangara. He's now working for the African Union Mission for Mali and the Sahel, and also the president of Ecowas.
I'm glad that they mentioned that missiles alone cannot solve the problem,
Exactly.
you know, to some extent, because I think, on a serious note, I think this is a very important convergence, you know, like of regional leaders coming together to discuss about like the threat, you know, in the Sahel and within the sub-region itself, actually. There's a need to respond to it, and it cannot only be done through military response. And events like this help, like in terms of like information sharing, like of like cross-border criminal networks. That is one important thing. But it's also important to understand that like this Sahel and our sub-region is very vulnerable to terrorism, and the United Nations security, you know, has already like ranked it, like given it like 19% of all like the terrorism acts in the world, which is very alarming to some extent, because, you know, it contains a significant portion. And what it does is like almost like 12.7 million people have been forcibly displaced, you know, and women and children constitute 80% of all these displacements. So they face like a higher vulnerable like situation. So it's very alarming, and it's very important that they come up with such strategies to make sure that they discourse about like the future, the way forward. You know, it's very crucial.
But this is it. People keep saying that you cannot solve it by force alone. Then what are the alternatives? Are you going to negotiate with these Islamist insurgents or the bandits in the case of Nigeria? Who are you going to negotiate with? How will that work?
So I think the fact that they are coming together, you know, like we are not even like out of this. Like you talk about the Gambia, you talk about the Senegalese, insurgents, the MFDs with the MFDC, it always bounces back like to the Gambia. So it's a need like to share information, because sharing information in this case is very important. Like, you need like intelligence, security intelligence as to like to know like most of these locations, like the locations of like cross-border criminal networks, it's very important. That is one of the most important like aspects of such gatherings actually.
Do you think that Ecowas can truly, really act as the unifier in this bloc, given the recent breakaway of the Sahel states?
Actually,
so
that is
in a situation where you need them all to cooperate.
Yeah, it is really debatable actually, to say if ECOWAS can really face the situation. I think there is a need like for them to work together as a team, and already I know the ECOWAS is trying to deploy almost like from 1,600 to 2,000 troops like at the latter part of like 2026, like to combat terrorism within the sub-region, which is important. But there is a need to also coordinate with the ACE nations actually.
There is concern that the insecurity in the Sahel could spill over to coastal West Africa generally. Yeah. So one wonders, how prepared are we?
I think there's a need for us to prepare ourselves. Sometimes if I go to Saragunda, I feel scared, man. Anything could happen. Yeah, but it's important that we prepare ourselves, because it is gradually coming. Just recently, we've heard of a clash, within the Senegal-Mali border to some extent. So that is alarming if they could come that very close, like, and it disrupted like a traveling, activities within those days. So it's important that we prepare ourselves. It is sending a clear message that, like, of course, it might lead to end to the coastal areas actually.
Absolutely, and sort of the international role.
But
partners like the EU, they're supporting, aren't they? But there's a shifting global priorities. Mm-hmm. So how can we guarantee that this international commitment will remain steady?
Yeah,
that is very important.
I think that is very, very important. But really, Mr. Mboj, I think the question that people should be asking is who are funding these groups? Because of recent we have seen how a frequent like there have been abductions in Nigeria. Nigeria has been like a clear example of most of these cases. So that's the question people should raise. And in most cases, some experts will tell you that, like, it is politically motivated. It is within the system. So there's a need to run some investigation. To sit, if they're really serious about this, to know what is really happening.
Yes, it is very serious, and it's evolving. Okay, thank you very much there, Usman. That was halfway of the program. 5 gone, 5 to go. We're taking a short break. We'll be right back. Hello, welcome back to the Week in Review. I'm Omar Badjie, and I'm joined today by my colleague Usman Jatta. We've already covered 5 stories, and we've got 5 more to go. To our next story. During the Week in Review, Banjul hosted leading medical minds across West Africa, really, as the West African College of Surgeons, in collaboration with the Edward Francis Small Teaching Hospital, convened the 4th Banjul International Surgical Scientific Conference. Let's just take a look and listen.
Medical conferences are a means of continuous medical education, exchange of ideas, and sharing of experiences and new techniques and knowledge and research findings for the medical community.
There we heard from Dr. Abubakar Jah of Sharab, and he was also the head of the organizing committee here. There we heard it, really, the significance, the importance of having these international conferences, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sharing of information and good practice.
Indeed, it is very crucial, and it is very timely. It comes at a time when the country is like continuously improving on its like surgical or like health fraternity, which is very important to some extent, actually, you know. And in this case, we're talking about surgery. You know, it's a very critical aspect of the health sector. And whenever surgery is mentioned, you know, we talk about resources. They need to get, money, and the required equipment to be able to conduct effective surgery. So that is why events like this are important, because you get to learn from experts. You know, they get to inform you that it is not all about money. It is also about like expertise, knowing what you are doing and how to improvise, which is very crucial.
Yes, but one wonders sort of how quickly these insights we gain from these conferences, how quickly these things could be translated, as it were, into from conference halls into operating theaters.
I think it has to do with discipline, actually, to some extent. Like, you just need to know your TOR, like your field. You know, when you're into something, you need to be passionate about it. But beyond the passion, it's like you need to understand, like the laws, you know, the rules of the profession. Sometimes people just do things, you know, base it on like, what you have been taught in class, but it should go beyond that. Now, for instance, sometimes you may think that like what you need is more equipment or so, but maybe what you need is like creating a standard lab where you work on your cleanliness, like to avoid like infections and other stuff. So it has a lot of elements involved, you know. So, you know, there's a way to find out, and it also, like the experts did, you know, talk about the need to, you know, to limit the issue of money to some extent, because it is putting many lives at risk. Sometimes you would need a surgery and they will tell you need, let's say, like $300,000 before you provide it. You know, your condition has escalated, and before you know, it's a done deal.
That's it. But we've across the region, really, with healthcare systems, we face many shortages, don't we?
Yeah.
Equipment, infrastructure, personnel. So one wonders whether innovation alone can solve it, if these other areas are not really up to scratch.
Indeed. There are challenges, actually, and no one can dispute that there are challenges in the system, you know. But there is a need to grow beyond those challenges, you know, to find solutions, you know, during tough conditions, you know, because some of these challenges, they expose you to opportunities, to think outside of the box. Yeah.
That's it. Necessity being the mother of invention. Thank you very much there, Mr. Jatta. Now we go on to the next story. During the week, at Bansang General Hospital, a significant milestone was marked, 10 years since the resumption of diplomatic relations between the Gambia and China. So to commemorate the occasion, $1 million worth of equipment was donated. Let's just take a look and listen.
It's a very, very important thing, and we want to use this opportunity to appeal to the team to do this very frequently, not every 2 years. I think that is too long. Probably if you can have this every 6 months, we'll be happy. I think every 6 months should do, and so that we have the team here. And another thing is, the last year, I remember when they came here, the cardiologist was able to diagnose a lot of people with some problems that probably we were not able to detect. All this is because of the expertise. And that is why we appeal to the Chinese medical team to help our hospital in terms of training.
There we have it. Some people will say that donations and outreach may provide immediate relief, but really how lasting is that impact?
I think the government should also really think of the long-term impact of our health system, you know, and how to rely on on our own self-finance, you know, initiatives to guard our health system. It's very important. I think it's a good initiative from the Chinese government, and since the resumption of diplomatic ties, you know, now 10 years, you know, they have been doing a lot, you know, in various sectors, and the health sector is one key area they have been very, you know, committed to work to improving. You know, but I think the government should also should learn from some of these things, and just, you know, that's it.
We understand that this package would involve training.
Yeah.
Obviously, in the short term, one welcomes sort of these interventions, obviously. one just wonders whether there's a plan for a longer term weaning, to sort of wean ourselves from relying on these largesse.
I think we should just take advantage of the opportunity, because you're dealing with health experts, people, who could diagnose a lot of like critical conditions, and just during their medical outreach, they have diagnosed almost 1,000 patients, which is very, very important and significant for the country. So what we can do is we should learn from those doctors. Let us not just have them in our hospitals, like providing medical care, but let it serve as a learning point for our doctors. Like we were talking about, like the international surgeons, like the Banjul International Conference. We have the West African, College of Surgeons, which is also really helping towards like training a lot of Gambians, which is really paying dividends. So when you're dealing with such international experts, I think there is a need like to harness their expertise, to the fullest level. That way around, at least, you can also rely on their impact, in your procedures.
Thank you very much, Usman. Now to our next story. Ecowas Community Court of Justice continued its sensitization mission, engaging judges, lawyers, lecturers, and students on their role in human rights and regional justice. Let's just take a look and listen.
While the community court focuses on interpreting the Ecowas Treaty, enforcing human rights, and applying international legal instruments with final and non-appealable decision, national court remain the primary venues for handling domestic legal matters and interpreting national law and constitutions. We view regional mechanisms like the Ecowas Court not as alternatives, but as indispensable complements to our national systems.
Its mandate goes beyond the interpretation and application of community laws. It is a critical instrument for upholding the rule of law, promoting accountability, and protecting the fundamental rights of citizens.
The last speaker there, Mortis Cisse, he's the Minister of Regional Integration, isn't he? And before that, we heard from Hussein Tamasi, the Solicitor General.
Yeah.
Wow, what have we here?
The
Solicitor General saying that this court complements, as it were, our domestic court.
Yeah.
But the reports, so many times, the decisions, the ruling of the court, national governments ignore them. Isn't that really the fundamental problem?
I think that's the main challenge of the court, actually, implementation of its judgments to some extent, and this is evident in various countries like Sierra Leone and other countries within the sub-region, actually. But I think one thing, it's like it helps to promote access to justice, which is very crucial. Access to justice is very important. But the implementation is the only challenge that the court is facing. When it comes to doing its work, and I think it needs a lot of consultations like this to be able to make sure that that challenge is overcome.
The constitutional lawyer, Lamin J. Dabo, raised interesting points there. We were just talking about it, the implementation of decisions.
Decisions, yeah.
Then it makes you wonder, what is the value of a judicial decision if enforcement remains weak?
Indeed, it's a question one should ask, actually. It's more of one could claim it's more of, it serves like a formality where one goes and presents your case, you win, and that's it. It's never enforced. So I think they should look at it properly and see, what they can do. But I think beyond that, what they could also do, because it's all about coming with reforms, and if it is a court of the sub-region, and that is why it is named as Ecowas Court of Justice. I mean, I was just telling Ade what they could do. They could have they can decentralize it, in the court, and if you have a part of the court in the Gambia, they could be operating with the Gambian courts, and that way around, I think some of their judgments could be effectively implemented to some extent. It's more of creating a synchronized system where the court works with various countries and,
But this is the key. The problem is not with where the court sits and the decisions they make. The problem is with national governments, as it were, implementing them. So rotating this, I'm not sure how that can change the fact that national governments, when it doesn't suit them, they wouldn't implement. Recently, in Cape Verde, you see, they explicitly came out and said they wouldn't accept the Ecowas court's decision on a particular gentleman, you know, who people tried to extradite him to the U.S. And I think the court said you couldn't, but they did.
I think it shows the low commitment from member states. Actually, you know, that is what it shows. You know, it is not hidden. It is written clearly. Actually. You know, and I believe those member countries are ECOWAS. So if they are not committed to some of those, you know, areas, I think to some extent the value of the regional body itself, you know, could mean a lot. You know, people could ask a lot of questions about its, you know, importance, you know, to some extent. Yeah.
Thank you very much there, Usman. Now to our next story. On World Malaria Day, the Gambia delivered encouraging news for the 6% drop in confirmed malaria cases between 2024 and 2025. Here, let's just listen to the Minister of Health.
Between 2024 and 2025, malaria cases declined by 46% from 108,090 to 58,283 in the Gambia. It is important to highlight that these gains were driven by bold steps and interventions taken by the Ministry of Health. Notably, the mass distribution of 1.1 million new generation insecticide-treated bed nets, reaching over 80% of households. This was done as part of the broader cross-border malaria initiative with Senegal. Seasonal malaria chemoprevention treatment courses administered to 127,578 children under 5 years, protecting them from malaria during the rainy season, which is the time when malaria attacks are frequent and highest.
So, Mr. Jatta, I understand that globally, progress has stalled, but in the Gambia, we are surging ahead. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's a quite a public health success for the Gambia. Actually, I think it's worth celebrating, and it means that like we are doing a lot when it comes to malaria response, you know, and which is very important, from education to supplying mosquito nets, you know, and working with our neighbors as well, Senegal, which is very important. I think it was one of the things the minister mentioned that like really, you know, helped in this massive drop of like malaria cases, you know, and the sensitization on like the issue of like, because malaria, you know, cannot thrive in a clean environment. So there's a need like to do a lot of like cleansing exercise, you know, like educate the public about, you know, the dangers of like keeping our spaces like littered and other problems. So it's a good milestone for the Gambia.
Absolutely, but for us, progress is really not the finish line.
Yes.
The finish line is elimination.
Elimination.
Do you think that we've gained the momentum that would lead us to elimination?
Yes, we can really eliminate it to some extent, but it means that we have to step up our efforts. You know, the sensitization has to go to another level, and the mosquito, you know, net distribution has to be like scaled, you know, and this has to be done like periodically. Like it's very important, like to update the system, because some people might have like a damage, you know, their nets. So it's important, you know, and I think it's really possible. You know, it's all about the mindset. Like I said, once we work on our environment, our cleanliness, we can really achieve it. Actually, we can really achieve it. You go to some compounds, you hardly detect whether, you know, they have got a mosquito, you know, to some extent. So I think it's quite important that we work on that. We, you know, improve on our attitudes and just make sure that, you know, we have that country we call the Gambia, the smiling coast, and a healthy country. That
the head of the FAO, Nathan Badjie, pointed out that yes, you need leadership, frontline health workers, and innovation as key drivers. But innovation requires sustained investment,
Yeah.
isn't it? That's always the key. But we realize that in some of our areas, the investment or the help we get, it all comes from outside, isn't it? So this dependence, there's always a risk in there, isn't there?
Yeah, I think that is very true, and there is a need like for us to be innovative, and this could be done in various forms actually, you know, like the cleaning side is just one area. Like we have seen the Q Group Foundation coming up with an initiative like Settle Sunyure, which is one area. But even with the mosquito nest, I think as a country we can be like, you know, we could be producing them. We could have factories that produce them. So different methods could be used.
But this is my fear.
Yes.
Where you depend on external funding, then your gains could decline depending on the funding.
Yeah.
It's not purely in your hands.
Yes, but
that's really where the danger is.
Yeah, but the funding can still be diverted like in another way within the same like area, and to some extent it will still yield efforts, more success, you know. I know, like, there is that fear, there is always that fear that, like, once you start improving, you know, the donors may, you know. But I think that is what everyone prays for. You don't want to be reliant or dependent on, like, someone forever. Actually.
But you have to be prepared, otherwise the price will be very heavy to so many people, particularly so-called ordinary people, people without means. They will pay the cost. Of that.
It's a gradual process. Rome was not built in a day. So I think if we work, you know, as a country, like when we work together, we put all hands on deck to be candid. I think we can achieve a lot of things. It's in the mind. We have to, you know, work on our mindset. You know.
Thank you very much, Usman. Now to our final story. The Convention of African People, which brought together writers, artisans, scholars from across the continent and the diaspora to talk about identity, culture, and self-representation. Let's just take a look and listen.
I just got in a whole load of beef before I came here for suggesting that we needed to be more connected to the continent. There's a whole thing in the diaspora, not everybody, but certainly some people who are trying to not be African, right? Are trying to run away from being African rather than trying to come back to Africa. Right? And it's really devastating to see. So this is part of the major reason we said let's do an event for Malcolm's birthday on the continent, was that we wanted to really bring the two together. Right? There's a quote that Malcolm says, he says, Africa will go no further than we will in the diaspora, and the diaspora will go no further than Africa will. We're one people, we have one bond, we're in one boat, we should be going together. So that's really what we're trying to do today here, is to follow in that footsteps, follow in that legacy, and to build on from there.
We heard from Kahinda Andrews, who's a member of the Harambee Organization of Black Unity. So what do you make of this? Some startling, to some extent, statement there. Some people are running away from being African. Can you imagine? What do you make of all of this?
I think the event reminds us that, like, you know, as Africans, we will always remain African, you know, no matter, you know, the environment we find ourselves in. You know, sometimes, you know, we have a lot of Africans living in the diaspora, and, you know, even if you were, like, let's say, like, born in the West, you still feel like, you know, you still have that African part of you, and, you know, there's a need, like, to reflect that, you know, and
that's a very interesting one, because there, Mr. Andrews is telling us some people do not want to be.
I know.
Is it the kind of identity that you don't have a choice, you're in it? It's a very complicated one. Blackness and Africanness, are they the same? We know that on our continent, up north, you have Arabic-looking people. Down south, you have white people, the white tribe. So this race, this racialized continental identity, and some people are beginning to question that. What do you think?
I think it's just like different people have different perception, and they see things from a different perspective as well, you know. But I think, like I said earlier, like, you know, once you're black, you know, nothing can change that, actually. It was not, like, it's not a crime, you know. It's something that destiny has already written. And, you know,
okay, so one doesn't have a choice in that identity.
You only hold your perception that, you know, I stand by this particular group, but, But like they say, no matter how long a log stays in the river, it will never turn to become a crocodile.
That's it, because a log doesn't think.
Yes.
I understand what you mean.
Yeah.
But this is really a very complicated area, really,
yeah.
because we're talking about telling our own stories.
Yeah.
Then one might ask, from what angle? Do we have just one story? There are many, many, many stories.
Stories, yeah.
Just as when it comes to decolonizing the mind,
Yeah.
you've got so many different strategies.
Strategies, yeah.
So the situation, the terrain, isn't it? It's far more complex sometimes than we give it.
That is why events like these
for.
are important.
That's
Like
it.
they help to, people, they talk about history, they talk about culture, arts, and connect people, once, because most people, what they lack is education. And when we talk about education, it's not only like the normal conventional education, but like proper education about their roots. And it's important for one to know its like foundation. Without that, you go nowhere.
The debate continues. Thank you very much there, Mr. Usman Jatta.
Thank you.
And thank you very much to our viewers. Until next time, goodbye.